Sony takes the "you can't get more woke than Overwatch" challenge and creates what can only be described as woke, the game. We'll get to that in 30 seconds, but let me introduce myself. I'm Mike S. Miller, 32-year veteran of the comic book industry, DC, Marvel, Game of Thrones, Hedge Knight artist, and creator of numerous intellectual properties including Lone Star, available now at LoneStarComic.com. Now I'm here to give my take on where my industry has gone, where the general media landscape has taken our culture over the span of my lifetime, and where I'd like to see it go in the future. I'm not here to hate everything or to assume the worst for clicks, but I am here to fight the culture war, as I have been doing since the AOL message boards were a thing back in 1996. I am that old. If you think the culture is worth saving and worth fighting for, please stick around and join the Blacklist Universe family. We're here to make a difference, and hope you are too. Now, back to the story. Sony's latest game launched yesterday to dismal customer response. Concord, a game developed by Firewalk Studios, failed to attract significant interest, with peak concurrent players not even reaching 700. This low engagement contrasts sharply with expectations for a game backed by a blockbuster studio like Sony. A former developer for the team behind Concord lashed out at critics and players, referring to them as talentless freaks. This response came in the wake of the game's poor launch performance, a dismissive attitude towards criticism common among spoiled children who seem to take over game development in recent years. It's not my fault you don't like the game I made, it's your fault for not understanding how good it is. Right. Reports suggest internal issues at Firewalk Studios, where a developer demanded to be referred to as Professor and pushed for extreme left-wing political views. This individual also reportedly advocated for the firing of unvaccinated colleagues, highlighting a toxic work environment influenced by HR policies enforcing leftist ideology. The game's design is another obvious problem that can't be ignored by anyone with brains that actually work. It includes elements like character pronouns and weekly narrative vignettes, and is overly focused on diversity, equity, and, of course, inclusion, rather than gameplay, mechanics, or player engagement. This focus has alienated potential players who prioritize gameplay over narrative or character identity politics. The same problem we've seen time and time again, most recently with Dustborn, now this. When will these companies realize there is no market for this hot garbage? Concord was compared unfavorably with other games in its genre, like Marvel Rivals, which received better reception despite similar thematic elements. The game's trailer on YouTube also received a high number of dislikes, suggesting a negative reception even before launch. And it's obvious why. Look at it. Sure, the gameplay looks decent. It's just a skin of Overwatch, or if you want to be honest, a reskin of Team Fortress 2. Except instead of trying to come up with unique, interesting characters who each have their own unique, interesting stories you can really identify with, they created what are possibly the most generic, boring, uninspired designs of any AAA game I have ever seen. And of course they are so diverse and inclusive, I'm surprised one of them isn't in a wheelchair. I wonder if the fat one has a random dies of heart attack feature. I'm sure she's vaccinated too. Sony's strategy with Concord and other titles seems completely misaligned with market demand, focusing on live service games with original IPs with no ability to capture the audience's interest. This approach, combined with a reduction in the number of projects in their pipeline, indicates a broader strategic issue within Sony's game division. Public sentiment on X, or Twitter, isn't helping either. Posts reflect a general disappointment and mockery towards Concord for its low player count, with users highlighting the game's failure as a case study in how not to engage with your audience or handle game development and marketing. Here's a clue for you, Sony. Don't mock and deride the people you're trying to sell your game to. It's not good business. Video gaming is a market just like any other. You cannot force a good or service onto people who don't want it. You're not going to gain the support and loyalty of customers by telling them they are the problem. You are the problem. Your product is the problem. If you can't abide by those basic market forces, you will only continue to lose millions on failed efforts to force DEI wokeism into the market. The case of Concord serves as a cautionary tale about the risks of prioritizing political or social agendas over gameplay and player enjoyment in game development. It also underscores the importance of developer-player relationships and the potential backlash from aggressive or dismissive responses to criticism. One win for the culture war vis-a-vis Concord, which is too little too late to save this disaster, is the removal of the LGBTQ tag on Steam. The discussion to remove the tag seems like an acknowledgement by the developers that the inclusion of such tags is alienating a significant portion of their potential player base. This reflects a broader backlash against woke culture, where including such tag is not just representation, but pandering to the LGBTXYZ mafia. The low player count shows consumers voting with their wallets against games they see as pushing woke agendas over gameplay quality or traditional gaming interest, as well as traditional, or what I would call rational, moral values. Video games should be a refuge from political debate and focus instead on entertainment, skill, and escapism. The removal of the tag could be seen as a nearly insignificant attempt to return to neutral or apolitical gaming, where the game's content, not its political stance, defines its market. Those of us on the right understand that games should not be platforms for social issues unless those issues are integral to the game's narrative in a non-political way. The Get Woke, Go Rogue mantra has become a rallying cry for those of us who believe that incorporating progressive social issues into products leads to commercial failure. Concord's case is evidence that prioritizing inclusivity or political statements over gameplay mechanics can nearly always result in poor sales. This is a lesson for developers to focus on creating universally appealing content rather than catering to niche political or social groups. Lesson: just because a tiny group is really good at being the squeaky wheel does not mean they have the money and support of the silent majority. The silent majority doesn't want this leftist garbage in their entertainment, and we vote with our dollars. You can't outwit the free market. If you're a business, you live and die by the will of the market, not the whines of the woke. Why does it matter what tags are used? On platforms like Steam, tags can influence discoverability. Removing the tag is an obvious attempt to broaden the game's appeal by not immediately associating it with contentious cultural issues. If you've ever played on Steam or Xbox Live, you'll realize the gaming world is not as full of cloistered, insular, easily triggered leftists as they would have you believe. So you might ask, how badly did Concord launch? The game's peak concurrent player count on its release day was significantly lower than expected, with figures around 697 players. The number is notably lower than its open beta peak, which was free, around 2388 players, a 70% drop. They couldn't give this away and convince people to buy it. Concord has received mixed reviews, with the Metacritic score hovering around 69% based on initial reviews for the PS5 version, suggesting a lukewarm reception from critics, even though some access media outlets pushed it as hard as they could, with claims like that of PC Gamer saying that it would defy shooter hero fatigue because it just looked so good. The oversaturation of the hero shooter genre is rife with free-to-play competitors that are simply far better than Concord. And the decision to go ahead and charge $40 for this catastrophe guarantees limiting its appeal to the gaming world. Again, on X, social media has highlighted the game's underwhelming launch. Users pointed out the stark contrast between Concord's numbers and other games, even those considered flops like Redfall or Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. This game is simply DOA. That's dead on arrival for the uninitiated. When you realize the estimated development cost is around $150 million over 8 years, the cost per player metric might just be the greatest failure in terms of ratio in the entire history of gaming. Unless your game just didn't launch, which, let's face it, that happens all the time. Anyways, that said, despite the initial dismal performance, some discussions touch on the potential for Concord to recover if significant updates or changes are made, similar to other live service games. Personally, I can't see how that would be done without a total reskin of every character and vehicle, basically doing a complete relaunch as a free-to-play, and doing some major mea culpa to the gaming community for trying to push this woke DEI agenda turd on the people. Comparisons with other games launches like Black Myth Wukong highlight how Concord failed to capture the market's audience with vastly different peak player counts. Black Myth Wukong achieved an unprecedented peak of over 2 million concurrent players on Steam shortly after its release, making it one of the largest single-player game launches in Steam's history. This indicates not just interest, but massive player engagement, suggesting a game that resonated deeply with its target audience. In stark contrast, Concord struggled to even reach 700 concurrent players at its peak on Steam. This number is not just low, it is alarmingly low when compared to industry standards for new releases, especially for a game with significant backing from a major publisher like Sony. Wukong not only didn't cater to woke ideological fascists, it openly defied them. It defied DEI, it defied LGBTQ, it defies its critics, and just put forth a game rich in lore, dynamic gameplay, unique and interesting designs, and overall world building. In other words, it put the game first and catered to gamers. Is that really that hard of a lesson to learn? If you're going to put $150 million into something, how about making it for the people you're trying to sell it to? Wukong did benefit from extensive pre-launch hype, partly due to its unique setting, impressive visuals, and the novelty of its approach within the action RPG genre. Its success was foreshadowed by record-breaking preload bandwidth usage on Steam, indicating high anticipation and interest. Concord entered the market with considerably less fanfare. But keep in mind, it lost 70% of beta users, which should have indicated to Sony that this game should never have been launched with the response it was getting throughout beta. Despite being a new IP from Firewalk Studios with Sony's support, Concord failed to generate any excitement. What are your thoughts? Can companies like Sony continue to pour hundreds of millions of dollars into these frivolous ideological forays? Or is it possible that BlackRock and their DEI initiative are going to eventually run out of money trying to force their Marxist agenda into a marketplace that clearly isn't interested in it? Let me know in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell notification. I, for one, am glad to see this money wasted, as hopefully the lessons of the free market will be learned and adhered to, but maybe that's just me. Thanks for joining, and remember, before you get too upset with this stuff, it's only game.